I think Tesla, would continue to do very well even if I was kidnapped by aliens. or went back to my home planet, maybe.
So yammy, gang gang, gang gang. Bitcoin, so yammy, gang gang, gang gang. Yes, 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 gang gang. Shiny City, yes, yes, yes. In cyberspace, gang gang, gang gang. Bitcoin, so good. Thank you, Luigi. That
That's 1, 2, 3. Oh my gosh, I've been time sucks. Oh well. Shit. Watch this.
Another disturbing finding, there's two papers, one by Alden, first author, Yang D. Marina, senior author, another one by Karagopoulos, I'm also a co-author of that paper, demonstrating the vaccines, because they stay in the body so long, it looks like they do permanently install into the human genome. The government, as they developed these vaccines, they kind of rushed it through the final stages. There was no assurances that these were safe. There was no genotoxicity, no teratogenicity studies. Now to learn, and in autopsy studies, the spike protein produced from the genetic material is found in the heart. Beaumont and colleagues have shown it. It's found in the brain. Yeah. Found in the brain, Laura and colleagues. So I can tell you, everyone who's taken the vaccine has this material in their brain, their heart, their adrenal glands, reproductive organs. Terrible thought. My heart goes out to people who've taken the vaccine. The vaccines, the messenger RNA vaccines for short, they've never been demonstrated to actually leave the body. They look like they're permanent, as well as the spike protein that's produced after them. This is very disturbing, so it's hard to guide. I was saying, 30 days, refrain from kissing and sexual contact with a vaccinated person, but I'm now extending that to at least 90 days and conservatively maybe extend it from a point forward. I know there's married couples and all kinds of personal implications there, but no, this messenger RNA looks like it's for keep. Every shot is accumulating in the body with no ability for the body to get rid of it.
Remove it.
Huh. Virology Journal, 2005 underheading, get ready for this. Quote, chloroquine is a potential inhibitor of SARS coronavirus infection and spread. Emphasis defined throughout. Means, of course, that Dr. Fauci had known for 15 years that chloroquine and in its milder derivative hydroxychloroquine will not only treat a current case of coronavirus therapeutic but prevent future cases, like prophylactic. So HCQ functions as both a cure and a vaccine. In other words, it's a weird. JP Morgan to buy almost $2 billion of mortgages in PacWest deal.
Those that this can help the unbanked, the underbanked, the underserved, those that lost money when SVB went down, when Credit Suisse encountered those problems, and the losses that we're now hearing about at First Republic. I mean, if that money was in Bitcoin, yeah, the value fluctuates. And once, hedging becomes more mature and the asset comes more mature, some of those highs and lows will begin to also smooth out. But the point is, their money would still have value. And when people start realizing, I can put money in a bank, but I can only put $250,000 in an insured account, that the limits of fiat currency and banking and fiat currency as a secure and safe asset have also kind of been revealed and disclosed to people. So there are people that are looking towards safe places, safe harbors for money. And a lot of the wealthy people are using like overnight repurchase agreements or, notes. But you have to be pretty sophisticated to access those markets or have a lot of money. You don't need to be sophisticated or have a lot of money to have your own private wallet, to transfer money from a son who's working in the U.S. to his mother who's living in El Salvador. The remittances are happening. The transfers of money between people who want to help Ukrainians is happening. And when you can explain those real-life cases for how these assets can help individual people control their own money and have an asset that is going to withstand the test of time, and Bitcoin will. I don't know.
God bless Judge Norika. Just rejected the Hunter Biden plea deal. Okay. This is about USOs. I already saw today. This talking about how they've recovered biological bodies that are non-human. Not weird, right? Satanic devil, goat weird. Totally normal. Look at that. 3. New Jersey governor doesn't want parents informed if their own kids changes gender identity. That's the same thing within Oregon and Washington currently. Crazy. Why is Washington, D.C. called District of Columbia? I just asked ChatGTP. It says Columbia. The term Columbia was used as a poetic and patriotic name for the United States in the late 18th century and early 19th century. It is derived from Columbus's name. District refers to the geographical area that was chosen to serve the nation's capital. The creation of Washington, D.C. results of the Resident Act of 1790, which authorized President George Washington to select a site along the Potomac River for the new capital. As the seat of the federal government, Washington, D.C. is not part of any state. What? And its governance is under the direct control of Congress. While residents of D.C. have representation in Congress, they do not have full voting representation in the same way other states do, which has been a topic of ongoing debate and discussion. Not know that. Anything else? Anything else? Anything interesting? No? Really? Fortnite's break-in. We just went through that. Let's see. Make me some creating mugshot portfolio on Instagram account. She has a mugshot portfolio. How do you say that your dad works for the cops without saying your dad works for the cops? Either rich, works for law enforcement. How do you say your parents either work for law firms or are rich without saying your parents either work? Yeah, that would never happen. No way. This is where that one quote comes from. White women don't get in trouble. That's not me saying that. I've heard that from white girls drunk at a bar saying that. You know what I mean? Like out loud in public. And no one questions them. All the dudes are that no one says anything. And you're like, oh, Jesus. Ooh, we gotta listen to something. Let's see here. Gonna work though. Right? Gonna work, Jack? Is it? Something tells me his shit's gonna go down. Again. Every time he tries to do something, it gets shut down pretty quick. Like, it's supposed to be going on right now. Didn't he say at 11? Oh, no, 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 no. Yeah. Yeah, at 11. So, what's up? What's going on? Hmm? Come on, dude. Where's it at? Where's it at? We could listen to this. We could listen to this. We could listen to this together here. Have a good old grand time, you know what I mean? Check the volume's working as far as for the yep, up there. That up a little bit so we can hear them. If U.S. Federal Reserve raises interest rates by, well, I mean, it's not guaranteed yet, bro. Is it? I thought the FOMC meeting was still going on. I think it was happening in 30 minutes last time I checked. I liked it. Yeah, so it hasn't even happened yet, but that person's already releasing news. Oh, guess not. Maybe it did just happen. Oh, no, no, no. Oh, yeah, I guess they did. Man, that's right. Whenever I get two sources that say it, you know, it confirms. So this thing, see, look, everyone's talking about the Fed rate. Okay. Where's this dude? Gonna work or what? What's going on? Not satire. Work at Y Combinator. See it. See the art. Oh, she makes it in the top pocket right here. Oh. Oh. Oh my gosh, dude. It's a beaut. It was a beaut. Actual scrolls mental disorders. I agree.
Shit coins.
Yes.
Bitcoin. It felt like you
McCormack,
were doing-
McCorcock, okay? Love the guy, and I'll always say this. Is he a real Bitcoiner? Fuck yeah, he is. As far as, reason he blocked me is because the whole, vaccination policy stance. You know, and I told him, I was like, I think you're a cool dude. I think we get along at a party, you know, have a couple drinks, have a good time. As far as that stance goes, I think it's fucking dog shit. And yeah, he blocked me after that. And now I'm ending up right, and now all of them are like this. I don't know what you're talking about, bro. Like whatever makes you sleep good at night,
It
man.
felt like you were doing the hard work up front to build the right company first.
Yes.
You know, no shit coins,
Yes.
Bitcoin focused, no stupid products. Now everything I understand about how you've built the back end in terms of, you know, you controlling the stack rather than outsourcing it. It sounds like you've built for the long term.
Yes. This company is being built like, you know, we're building a cathedral, you know, brick by brick. And so, you know, we didn't feel this need to like, you know, yell it from the rooftops early on. Like we needed to figure things out, right? We had a lot we had to do to get it all right. And we're just now getting to the point where
Yeah. All right, markets already knew. What's next?
Apprehensions in May 2019. And last month, under the Biden administration, here is this chart. Shows that under Trump, there were 133,000 border apprehensions in May 2019. And last month, under the Biden administration, there were less than 100,000 border apprehensions. The facts show the southern border is doing better last month than it was under Trump in May 2019. Here's this chart. Shows that under Trump,
Wait, what?
there were 133,000 border apprehensions in May 2019. And last month, under the Biden administration, there were less than 100,000 border apprehensions. The facts show the southern border is doing better last month than it was under Trump in May 2019. Here's this chart.
You guys see that? It's doing better. The border, we're letting more people through, and the border is considered doing better. The world has just gone cuckoo mad. Can't save everyone, dude. This is what's wrong. You cannot form your own formulas and opinions and look at the chart and then be like, but you just listen blindly. You're gonna be like, oh, we're doing great. And it's like, okay, yeah, great. Whatever you say, dude. Come on, dude. Are you gonna play this thing or not? Said today at 11 a.m. and it's 11 a.m. So oh, they're in there. Oh, that's bullshit. I'm like sitting here waiting.
Of officers of his company, the CFO, the CEO, and others, and members of their families. So they banned not only their business accounts, but they banned their private accounts. And Joseph Merkel, as many of you may know, is a doctor who is an osteopath who's very famous in the health and wellness space. He has one of the largest vitamin companies and nutritional supplement companies in the world. And he wrote a book during with me, not the Fauci book, but another book, criticizing the lockdowns and the medical interventions during the pandemic. And Elizabeth Warren publicly demanded that Amazon censor that book, which Amazon then did. So I'm in litigation right at this moment with Elizabeth Warren on that lawsuit. Oh, Dr. Mercola is a known dissenter, and here we have a powerful banking interest that it receives all kinds of federal government support, and is utterly dependent on its relationship with the Fed and with
Oh,
the
that's
federal
bomb.
government and with federal government agencies or its welfare. And here it is shutting down one of its customers for political speech. So we live already in this world, and I think that incident alone should be one that all of us should be terrified about, and it makes the move toward Bitcoin all the more important.
I think that your story echoes the sentiment of quite a few people whose stories we heard, and we've obviously heard many stories of the banking industry cutting off both crypto platforms and individuals who are attached to Bitcoin in various ways. So I think that
Market
rings
is
true
pinned
with
with
quite a lot of
bullish
people.
dealer gamma.
Now, moving on, you recently shared the idea that you would gradually back the U.S. dollar with a basket of hard assets, including Bitcoin. Can you expand on that concept a bit?
Yeah, and this is, um, my proposal what I would say is a very modest proposal, to make a small number of T-bills backed by a basket of hard assets, including gold and silver and platinum and Bitcoin. And this is something that my uncle did, something similar to what my uncle did a few weeks actually before his death, when he ordered the printing of a small number of silverbacks, of silver certificates, which I saw a lot of when I was a kid, and have kind of have disappeared shortly after that. But we all know that the unrestrained spending by our government has created a massive risk for the global economy, and it's engendered tremendous concentrations of wealth and wealth inequality, and helped to offshore our jobs, and and created a lot of other problems. My policy of gradually inserting a new commodity reserve, small number of commodity reserved assets at the base of the money system, may be a way to discipline the Fed, to put some discipline into the marketplace, to give some consumers, Americans who would want to buy those assets, an ability to buy something that actually is commodity based. And with the hope, and it's something that my council of economic advisors is looking at right now, because my purpose is to rebuild the middle class in America, and we are looking at where how that kind of commodity based asset might put a little bit of discipline into the Fed and the practice of just printing money arbitrarily, with no control and no backstop at all. I think I see zero threat to our monetary policy from this, or to our financial marketplace. And my proposal is to do something very, very similar to what my uncle did with silverbacks in 1963.
Hi, Mr. Kennedy. Natalie Brunel here. Thank you so much for answering our questions.
Wow,
And
someone
thank you
with a
to
good
Scott
mic,
and the other
finally.
panelists. I recently had the chance to
Wow.
read your book, American Values, and I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot about your family's backstory. And one part that resonated with me was when you wrote that your grandfather, Joe Kennedy, believed America's prosperity was its most reliable source of stability and national security, and that we must choose to protect democracy over being seduced by imperialism. How would you grade us on these values? And secondly, how do we make America prosperous to protect these ideals?
Well, that I mean, the grade would be a F grade, and this is something. This was a theme among our founding, the framers of our Constitution, is that universally they wanted to keep America out of foreign wars. John Quincy Adams spoke for the rest of the framers when he said that America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. We commend democracy in other nations. We support it morally, but we are not. We don't send our military abroad, because they understood that you cannot have a an imperium abroad, an imperial nation abroad, and continue to have a democracy.
What the fuck happened? The hell happened here?
We obviously had a bit of a technical issue there. We're going to bring him back up, and we'll continue on. I assume everybody can hear me, but that he dropped off. So we're going to send another invite there. We'll be back momentarily.
Bam Bam Blakva. Hanging out with What's Up Mikey. Mikey's big in the cannabis and the ETH world, FT world. But Main Gardens with the crystals.
Panelists, while we're bringing him back up, you guys can feel free to. Oh, here he is. I was going to say we could discuss what we've heard so far, but we're going to go ahead invite him back up to co-host.
Perfect.
And continue on.
Hello, can you hear me?
We've got you. Classic Twitter glitch.
Okay, sorry about that. So I was saying that our founding fathers were unambiguous that we could not afford to turn America into an imperium abroad, because it would be inconsistent with democracy at home. We would turn ourselves into a garrison state, a security state, a surveillance state. My grandfather said we should arm ourselves to the teeth around our borders, create Fortress of America. The real strength of of a country comes not from military power, but from economic power, from financial power. on building a robust middle class. And that's what we should focus on. There's a famous historian called Paul Kennedy, who's no relationship to my family, who's a professor at Yale, and he's written a number of books looking at the declines of an empire. And he's looked at the declines of every empire in the last 500 years and traced all of them to the overextension of their militaries abroad. And when I was 7 years old, and on my birthday on January 17th, 1961, 3 days before my uncle took office, the outgoing president, Dwight Eisenhower, gave this famous speech, which today really stands as what I believe the most important speech in American history, where he warned America against the domination by a military industrial complex. And he said, by the way, a medical industrial complex driven by federal scientific bureaucracies.
Uh-oh, Mitch McConnell might be
people forget about that warning in his speech, but it's very it was very prescient, looking back over the COVID pandemic.
There it is.
But
look at him. He was talking,
my uncle,
and then he just goes blank, dude. Did you see that?
Immediately realized that this was going to be his battle. 2 months in, he had the CIA and his Joint Chiefs of Staff lie to him about the Bay of Pigs and get us into try to suck him into a U.S.-led invasion of Cuba. And he refused, but those men in the Cuban battalion and the brigade were dying on the beach. He came out of his office. He realized that the whole thing had been a trap by the CIA, by Allen Dulles, who he then fired. He fired Charles Cabell, who was the director of military operations in the CIA, and Richard Bissell, who was in charge of clandestine activities, who had all lied to him. And he said, coming out of that meeting, that he wanted to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. And he said that because he realized that the function of the agency was no longer to protect Americans' national security, but it had devolved into doing exactly what Eisenhower had warned about.
That's why I love Stacy and Max. They just say it how it is. They're not there to defend nothing. They're not there to deny nothing. They just say it how it is. You know? People hate him for it, though. You know, they want, oh, that's not nice. That's not politically correct. That's fuck you, man. Either grow up or get off the internet, then.
In combat
That's simple.
with his own military brass and intelligence apparatus, he refused to go into Laos. Who wanted him to go to war, who considered war both inevitable with the Soviet Union, inevitable, desirable. He refused to go into Laos. He refused to go into Cuba on both occasions. He refused in '62 to go into Berlin. And he refused to send combat troops to Vietnam, despite their pleadings that he send 250,000 combat troops. In the end, he sent 16,000 advisors, Green Berets, who were not allowed.
Should argue with more people in
rules
line.
of engagement to participate in combat activities. Many of them did. And in October 1963, a month before his death, October 22nd, he heard that a Green Beret had died in Vietnam. And he asked his aide to bring him a casualty list. And the aide brought him a casualty list that showed that 75 of U.S. servicemen, these advisors, had been killed. And he said, that's too many. And that day he signed National Security Order 263, ordering all troops home, all military advisors home from Vietnam within a year, with the first 1,000 coming home beginning the next month. Well, a month later, he was killed. And a week after that, President Johnson remanded that order, and within a year sent 250,000 troops, which is what they had been trying to get my Uncle Jack to do. And it became an American war, and Nixon, who followed him, my father then campaigned against Johnson and the war in '68 and was killed in that campaign. Nixon then became president, sent 560,000 troops, and 56,000 never came home, including my cousin George Skako, who was killed in the Tet Offensive. And And that war then, led to the next war. And so we've been now we've had these series of traumas that have pushed us into the surveillance state. We had the Vietnam War, we had Martin Luther King's death, my father's death, my uncle's death, Malcolm X's death, and then COVID-19, most recently, and the World Trade Center attack, all of which have pushed us down the road into a surveillance state. And I would say America today is the surveillance state that Dwight Eisenhower warned us against. And that's why I would give us an F for failure.
Well, I certainly think a lot of people would agree, but digging a little bit more into the idea of rebuilding America's prosperity, you have acknowledged on several shows that today in America, we don't have free markets. We have crony capitalism, this idea of brutal competition for the poor and cushy socialism for the rich. And I would extend that to say that today's oligarchs are sort of a coalition of capital comprised of Wall Street, the big banks, massive corporations, and the political elites. Meanwhile, the working class, you talk about a lot, largely feels very left out, left behind. And a lot of us think Bitcoin somewhat fixes this.
Genius.
But how will you tame the oligarchs and reduce their power? And what does that mean for the Fed and money printing?
Well, you're right about that. And, and it's not a Republican or Democratic issue. Both Biden and Trump administration essentially had the same fiscal and monetary policies, and which was just printing money. We print over the last 6 years during those two administrations. Our national debt increased by $13 trillion. That's 40% of all the money that's ever been borrowed since George Washington. And the Fed printed $4 trillion, and that's 48% of all the money that's ever been printed by the Fed since it opens its doors in the fall
So we're going through hyperinflation
of
right
1914. Now. And so what has this done? I love what you said, associating that money printing with these huge concentrations of wealth and the disparities between rich and poor. The poor are suffering because of the inflation. Energy prices are now up 37% this year. Groceries are up 27%. And the U.S. worker has not benefited from all that money pouring into the marketplace. U.S. wages, and this is really extraordinary, our growth rate, despite all of that money being poured in, has been only 2% per year. And it was 5% per year with virtually no money pouring in during my uncle's administration. And what's happened to wages? Wages have gone up by barely 3.5% since December of 2016. And meanwhile, this is hourly wages have gone up 3.5% since 2016. Meanwhile, the top 0.1% of households, the top 130,000 households, have seen their income, their net worths increase by 30%. So the top dogs, the fat cats, have gotten 10 times richer from that huge influx of wealth into the market. And while workers, people who actually go out and work for a living, hourly wages, have basically stayed the same. So it's not helping the poor. And what do we need to do to deal with it? One is we need to bring back the Glass-Steagall Act. And Glass-Steagall's entire scheme for central banking. We need, the Fed is the captive of not just Wall Street, but of Washington spenders, because it erroneously attempts to manipulate the mainstream economy with low interest rates and stock market supports. We need to get the Fed out of Wall Street on a day-to-day basis. The original scheme that Glass-Steagall had was that the central bank would operate through marketplace discount windows at 12 regional banks operating as far from Wall Street as they could possibly get. And the essential purpose of that central bank was to keep commercial banking liquid but it did so by charging market-based rates of interest and a penalty spread on the privilege of using the discount window. Oh, it wasn't susceptible to financial bubbles or Main Street inflation because it could only issue credit, central bank credit, which means to print money, of course, based on goods that were already produced. And therefore, it automatically kept the supply and demand in balance uh, because the bank credit it enabled had to be convertible into gold on demand. Of course, we've lost that. We need to bring a lot of Glass-Steagall back, and and you know and Bitcoin is part of the process because Bitcoin allows small investors to actually have an inflation-proof currency, and that is part of the freedom. I mean, because right now anybody can use fiat currency is at the mercy of this system, which is designed to strip mine wealth from Main Street and from the middle class and from the poor in this country and put it into the pockets of the super rich. Um, we need to cut costs. We need to restore fiscal balance through long-term savings. And we need the first and most important and obvious thing that I'm going to do is cut the military budget, which is now about $1.3 trillion a year. If you can't cut the 300 billion to veterans, and some of the national security is less susceptible to cuts, but that will get better over time as we stop meddling abroad. But 900 billion now goes to the military. So we were told at the beginning of when the Soviet Union collapsed that we were going to get a peace dividend. We were told that the military budget would be cut from 600 billion to 200 billion, and that was enough to protect our country. When Eisenhower, at the height of the Cold War, when we were facing the Soviet Union with a threat that is nowhere in sight today, the Soviet Union at the apex of its power, he cut military spending to the equivalent in today's dollars of 500 billion. Well, today it's 900 billion. So at very least, we could cut it by 45% and get back to where Eisenhower was at the beginning of the Cold War. At the height of the Cold War. And that will save us about $4 trillion over the next 10 years. If we don't do this, we're going to increase our debt projections by 20 trillion over the next decade, on top of the 33 trillion we already have. And that torrent of red ink is going to bury future generations in impossible debts, and that'll cause interest rates to soar. And we need to reduce that by 50 and probably 75%. We can do that by money savings in reducing chronic disease in our country. We pay more for medical care, double, triple, or quadruple than Europeans pay per capita. Oh, and the reason for that is chronic disease. We went from 6% of Americans having chronic disease when I was a kid to over 55%
Chronic
disease today, and
disease.
growing. And we need to cut that, and we can do that very quickly. We have to identify the causes. We know what they are, and we have to eliminate them. And right now, we spend $4.3 trillion a year on healthcare costs. It's so much more than anybody else in the world. We need, and 80% of that goes to chronic disease. It should be 6%. And we need to, when my uncle was president in 1960, we paid about 1/20th for healthcare of what we do today in real dollars. And a lot of that is because of the explosion of chronic disease in our country. And that, for the long term, is probably the most important thing that we can do. And it's going to be my number one priority as president. I can tell you some other ideas for cutting. Let me just add one more. The GAO, the General Accounting Office, for the last 25 years, every year produces a report about waste in government where it identifies certain expenditures that should have expired years ago, where people are, in many cases, literally doing nothing. And yet those expenditures just get automatically renewed every year because of some, congressman's nephew has the job or whatever, for political reasons, but they're not doing our country any good. So all of those reports every year, nothing is ever done about them. They sit on a shelf at the GAO. I'm going to name essentially a base closing commission, the way that we did for our military at the end of the Cold War, to go through those lists, those 25 years of lists, and identify the ripest fruit to pick from that list, all of the worst ways in government that are indefensible. And I'm going to put all of those cuts into a single bill, and I'm going to ask Congress to do an up or down vote on them. And nobody's ever done anything like that. And I think.
No. Get me back in.
Very quickly.
I refreshed it instead of just pressing home. No.
Mr. Kennedy, Marty Beck here. Thank you for joining us for this discussion. To build on your comments about the surveillance state from earlier, I think one thing as an industry that we've really been paying attention to and worry about is the encroachment of KYC, AML regulation on Bitcoin companies. These KYC, AML regulations seem to be pretty ineffective, yet they loft a bunch of compliance costs on individual companies, and the encroachment seems to be getting worse. As of January 1st, 2024, individuals who receive more than $10,000 worth of Bitcoin from another individual are going to be forced to report the personal information of their counterpart in that trade to the IRS. So as of Jan 1st, 2024, the government and the IRS will be expecting individuals to collect names, addresses, and social security information on other individuals, essentially expanding the KYC AML reach from companies to individuals. And considering that these regulations seem to be wholly ineffective and completely burdensome on companies and soon to be individuals, what in your mind are things that we can do to begin to peel back these invasive regulations that seem to power the surveillance state?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the one justification for it that's legitimate is to prevent money laundering. But what I see is that all of these things, the money laundering complaints, which by the way, I think the money laundering issue is a legitimate issue, and that we need controls that are sufficient to do that. But a lot of these issues, the KYC issue, the environmental issues, are smoke screens for just this overwhelming hostility by Mr. Gensler and the Biden administration in general toward Bitcoin, and the favoritism that they are, showing to BlackRock and to Goldman and to and to their friends on Wall Street. I think Gensler's approved over 50 ETFs for BlackRock. And those ETFs are going to be, are right now, that's the best, easiest way for you to own Bitcoin, because people don't want to pay the taxes for conversion and deal with all the issues that you're talking about, and the difficulty of banking which they've created. And so they're funneling people into these ETFs. And as soon as they create a central bank digital currency, BlackRock will transform those ETFs from Bitcoin into CBDCs and trap us all in that, in that kind of slavery. So, I don't know exactly. I need to study this issue and get a lot of expert advice from people like you. What I'm going to say to you is that what I want is transparency. I want to bring the innovation ecosystems and entrepreneurial ecosystems
You're being super
that grow out of Bitcoin. I want to keep those in America. I want to end the barriers as much as I can to Bitcoin America. I want to do, you know what, one of the things that we did with the dot-com revolution is we suspended taxes for the first decade. And it brought all the engineers and and it made Silicon Valley a safe place for the industry. And it brought that ecosystem to our country and made us the dominant force in the dot-com boom. And we need to be doing the same thing with Bitcoin. And I don't know, I've talked about some kind of suspension of the capital gains taxes for conversion of Bitcoin. I have my financial team, my council and economic advisors looking at that and running the numbers on that right now. I mean, one of the things we want to avoid is creating huge windfalls for BlackRock and for Goldman. But there may be able to do that. We may be able to do that with a cap.
I'm gonna make some homas
on capital gains. With a cap, like for example, $1 million cap, so that small investors who are into Bitcoin would not have to pay the capital gains taxes, but super large holding companies like BlackRock and Goldman would. But what I don't want to do right now. If you own a big chunk of Bitcoin, the best thing for you to do is if you're going to convert it, when you convert it, you're getting double tax. So if you buy a car with Bitcoin, you pay taxes twice. And if you want to convert your Bitcoin into dollars, you're going to get raked over the coals. And what that's incentivizing is an exodus of the individuals who are the most innovative individuals, the greatest entrepreneurs in our countries, and the greatest engineers and thinkers who are being driven out of our country to Portugal, to Germany, to Puerto Rico, or whatever. And I want to keep those people here in the United States. I want a system that's fair. I want a system that is transparent. I want a system that is welcoming to Bitcoiners and not hostile to them. And I want a currency that is actually a currency. If you have Canadian dollars and you come to the United States and you want to make a conversion, you don't have to pay a tax on them, even if there was even if the dollar got strong and the Canadian dollar got weak or whatever, or the Canadian dollar gets strong and the U.S. dollar is weak. You don't, and so your Canadian money is more valuable now, 25% more valuable. You don't have to pay a capital gains tax on that 25%. You just do the conversion. And Bitcoin, it's troubling to me that it's treated as a commodity. And I think what will happen over time is that when more and more countries follow El Salvador and actually adopt and begin trading in Bitcoins, that there's going to be pressure for countries to get rid of those capital gain taxes. But in the meantime, I think that we should do it in a way that encourages the use of Bitcoin by smaller investors, by smaller holders, that does not create these massive windfalls for Blackstone or for BlackRock and Goldman, but to lift all of the impediments that we can from transacting in Bitcoin and really turn it into a currency that people can go out on the street and people can protect their wealth. They can, the middle class people can buy a Bitcoin, protect their wealth, and then use it for transactions without getting punished for it.
Another problem we see on the horizon in the industry within the United States revolves around the Bitcoin mining industry and its energy intensity. There seems to be a lot of misunderstanding about where Bitcoin mining fits into the energy sector and how it can actually be additive and make the sector more efficient overall. However, there do seem to be individual states like New York that are beginning to enact discriminatory laws or taxes against Bitcoin miners, signaling them out and treating them unfairly compared to other industries or individuals that are
I agree.
consuming electricity. If elected, would you be able to do anything to prevent that discrimination against the mining industry?
Well, I don't know exactly what I can do to change New York State law, but I'm an environmentalist. I was a partner in the biggest green tech venture capital firm in the country, which was Vantage Point. My company's built the Ivanpah plant, which is the largest solar thermal plant in North America, one of the largest, I think the second largest, third largest plant in North America, and another company that I was part owner of built the PVC plant at Sault Ste. Marie, and so the two of the biggest plants in North America that I was involved in. I've been involved in wind and all kinds of renewable energy investments, and I care about the environment and I care about efficiency, but I believe that the environmental arguments about Bitcoin are mostly smokescreens to obscure the real motives for suppressing Bitcoin. And Bitcoin threatens the monopoly on money that has allowed the US and other governments to print endless money to finance endless wars and to finance nonsensical, giant, environmentally destructive projects. And that's another one of these, outcomes, these terrible outcomes from fiat currency. Uh, and, and in truth, as most of you know, as miners, you know that your profit margins are completely dependent on low cost energy. So you have a huge incentive to chase low cost energy. And a lot of times that means chasing variable power sources and Bitcoin is a flexible load activity, which means it can help balance the grid by shutting down at peak times and using up the slack when demand is low, and that actually provides a really important revenue stream that may make certain solar and wind plants marginally profitable as opposed to unprofitable and therefore financeable, because you can move your Bitcoin to that site and you can mine there. And and that a lot of times that peaks when the electrons are hitting the earth at peak and there's a low demand. That plant is producing the power anyway, transforming those electrons into electricity, but it can't sell it. There's no market. And if you put Bitcoin operations at that site, you can turn that plant profitable. So it actually is I think, a potential huge boom to the creation of renewable energy. Somebody who's tried to finance and who has successfully financed renewable energy projects, I can tell you that those kind of marginal revenue streams can make the decisive difference as to whether or not you can or cannot get financing for that project. So I think, if we do it intelligently, and I think a lot of you guys are already doing this, it is actually a huge environmental benefit. And even when it's using carbon energy, the carbon energy it uses, for example, in North Carolina has the biggest coal fleet in the country. That coal fleet, the plants are 80 years old, so all the debt is already amortized. So they're very cheap to operate, and they can sell energy for 11 cents a kilowatt hour. But the coal plant has to operate all night. You can't turn it off. You can't, and so at night that energy is dropping basically to free. People pay 2 cents, 1 cent, 2 cents, and they're starved for that. So, and even when they do, when Bitcoin is using carbon-based energy, it's usually using carbon-based energy off peak when the energy is going to be burned anyway. The coal is going to be burned. The carbon and the mercury and the acid rain and all the other bad stuff is going to go in the atmosphere anyway. You're not adding to the problem. And then, there's also these opportunities that many Bitcoiners are chasing to monetize methane discharges from landfills uh, and from gas wells and other places around the country where that gas would otherwise be flared off. And you can take it and actually turn it into energy. And that also is a net environmental benefit. So I think it's a huge mistake that these states are making. And I think that it's motivated not by, maybe the legislature who's actually pushing these bills has been fooled. The people actually behind these bills are the financial power centers who are terrified of this competition from Bitcoin and for what its capacity to expose the fraud in the monetary systems.
I like it.
Hey, Bobby. It's great to speak with you.
Bobby. He called him Bobby.
As Bitcoiners, many of us are very passionate about
Who is that?
people on the nature of money.
Bobby.
So what I'd like to ask you is,
Robert called him Bobby.
Economic difference, if any, between money printing,
hey Bobby,
quantitative easing, and currency counterfeiting?
Well, it's legal. That's the big difference. That may be the only difference.
So there's no economic difference, just a legal one.
Yeah, I would say that's the only difference.
Thank you.
Bobby? Who is that?
I'll ask you a longer question now.
Ooh, that looks fire.
Jim Marrs wrote a book called Crossfire, in which he presented a theory that
my stomach can't even handle that right now, but that looks bomb. I ain't gonna lie.
Forces opposed to this action might have played at least some part in the assassination. And in that book, Marrs alleged that Executive Order 11110 was an effort by Kennedy to transfer power from the Fed to the United States Department of the Treasury by replacing Federal Reserve notes with silver certificates.
Oh, nice.
In your estimation, was JFK attempting to rein in the power of the Fed with Executive Order 11110? And if so, was this a factor in the assassination of John F. Kennedy?
He was certainly trying to rein in the power of the Fed. My grandfather was disturbed by what had happened to the Fed, and my uncle was alarmed by it too. And they knew enough about monetary policy to see what the end game was going to be, which is that the rich were going to get richer and that we were going to turn our country into an oligarchy, a feudal aristocracy, and away from democracy. So I have never seen any evidence that anybody involved in his assassination and can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah, I have not seen any evidence that anybody involved in this assassination was motivated by that. We know the people at this point who were involved. There's been many now confessions, people like E. Howard Hunt, like David Morales, like David Atlee Phillips, and many of the Cuban players who were involved have discussed their involvement, and there's thousands and thousands of pages of documents that we know. And I've talked to people who were involved in the assassination, who were there that day, there's so much documentary evidence. We have a very clear idea of who was involved, and I think those people were mainly motivated by the withdrawal from Vietnam, which was a CIA project, and most of all by my uncle's failure to invade Cuba on 2 occasions when the CIA wanted him to, and then ordering the groups that were like Alpha 66 and the other groups of assassins that were that were harassing Cuba and Cuban commerce and
Not in that
Russian
case.
commerce from ports and hideaways in Miami and on Florida, from Fort Myers down. Um, my uncle and father had the Coast Guard come and confiscate their boats and their weapons and stop the harassment. That was part of his settlement with Khrushchev after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when he was moving towards peace with Russia, and part of that peace was, and with Cuba. The day my uncle was killed, he had an emissary meeting with Castro to talk about ending the embargo. And Castro, I've spoken to Castro about that myself at length on several occasions, and he was, and the indications are that the principal anger that the individuals from the CIA who were involved in the assassination, the principal source of their anger was about Cuba and Vietnam.
Thank you, thank you. So one last question. One of my favorite philosophical questions is, what is money? Could you just speak to the fundamental nature of money as you see it and its impact on human psychology, on politics, and its role in world history?
Somebody else would be much better at speaking about that. And I don't want to waste your time, because my thoughts about that are probably very sophomoric compared to virtually everybody on this phone call, who spends a lot of time studying money, reading about it. And I just don't have, if you ask me about a subject that I, have given a lot of thought and a wealth of information, but with this subject, it's never been a preoccupation for me. It literally became a preoccupation when I saw the links with freedom. So I haven't done my homework, on money, on really understanding it and delving into it, and it's fascinating. I know. I mean, because it's, that dollar it has no value. The only value it has, the faith that people have in it that it will have value, and that faith is, is based upon a lot of precepts that may or may not be firmly rooted in concrete. Oh, but I don't understand it. And as I said, my thoughts about this would be infantile compared to some of the stuff and that some of the ways that you guys have of thinking about this. Some of the very, very sophisticated ways that you guys have, who spend your life thinking about it. And I got dragged kicking and screaming into this issue because I saw the connection with freedom, and I realized that, I always thought freedom of speech is the most important freedom. And suddenly I realized, wait a minute, transactional freedom is just as important, because if you don't have that, you're a slave. And that's probably the most sophisticated truth that I can say about it, that would be helpful to anybody, that it's about freedom.
Thank you.
Mark, please.
Yes, thank you. RFK, this is Mark Moss. I appreciate your time here. Really, really good to hear your take on a lot of these issues, and you've answered a lot already with some really long answers. So I appreciate your detail to that. Some of the things you talked about were like the kind of the encroachment of the military industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industrial complex, and maybe the censorship industrial complex as well. And those are all things that I'm already asked about KYC, know your customer, and sort of continue to encroach on that surveillance state. But as all of these industrial complexes have grown so big, they've sort of embedded themselves with like this administrative state that's neither elected nor do they have terms. And it seems like maybe other politicians have had a tough time dealing with that. Specifically, Trump was going to try to drain it, but these administrative states seem to have power. And so I'm just curious if you have a plan. I think you're right in kind of identifying the problem, these industrial complexes, but do you have a specific plan of how you can kind of handle these entrenched administrative state people?
Well, yeah, actually, I mean, I don't want to like blow my own horn, but I think that that's my experience with administrative agencies is probably the single greatest qualifier for me being president at this particular time in history, because I've spent 40 years suing these companies, and the the agencies that are supposed to regulate them. Oh, I've probably bought about 500 environmental cases, lawsuits. When you do a lawsuit, it's almost like getting a PhD in that subject, because you're so scared about losing, and you have to have a 360 degree domain knowledge of that. You have to know where because it's a battle. It's hand-to-hand combat for survival with the guy on the other side, and the more knowledge you have, the better. So you're really forced to learn kind of everything about the subject. And 20% of my cases are against the agencies, the agency that is supposed to regulate us. So these agencies become, and this is the fulcrum, this is where the rubber meets the road on what I call, this corrupt corporate capture, this corrupt corporate merger of state and corporate power. The place where that actually happens is through the mechanism through which that actually happens is regulatory capture of the agencies. And it's very, very well documented, all the dynamics that lead to regulatory capture. It occurs in revolving doors to and from the industry they're supposed to regulate. It occurs with the budget process. It occurs through the chairman of the committees in Congress that regulate these. Those guys are bought and paid for by the industry, and all these things conspire with each other to. All these forces conspire with each other to transform.
What is that? What is that?
Regulatory agencies into sock puppets for the industry they're supposed to regulate. And each of the agencies has different problems. And I've sued most of the key agencies. So I've sued NIH, CDC, and FDA. FDA, the health regulatory agencies are among the most captured. FDA gets 50% of its budget from pharmaceutical companies, and that's something that I'm going to deal with, that I need to deal with right away. They should not be getting any money. CDC spends 45% of its budget buying vaccines and sweetheart deals and then promoting them. $12 billion budget, about $5 billion goes to that, promoting them to children, mandating for people. NIH is now just an incubator for pharmaceutical companies, so that every product, it creates the product, transfers the pharmaceutical industry, and then it maintains a royalty, a margin right for the royalties, the patent. And individuals within NIH, the department heads, the branch heads, the scientists themselves who work on various medical products also get royalty interest. So, for example, the Moderna vaccine is owned by NIH. 50% of the profits, tens of billions of dollars, are going to the agency, and individuals, about 6 individuals within that agency, will have margin rights that will earn them $150,000 a year for as long as that product is on the market, that mRNA platform is on the market. They and their families, their children, their children's children are going to be making this huge amount of money every year. So, that obviously those mercantile ambitions of individuals and of the agency itself have subsumed the regulatory function. And and I also know the individuals in the agencies who need to be moved. I can see how the corruption has taken place. I actually know the names and, a lot about the worst individuals. And I will be able to go to Bethesda on my first week in office and start cleaning up the mess out there. Right now, I'm in a battle with DOT because I'm representing 1,000 families who's in Ohio, Eastern Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern train spill. And there's hundreds and hundreds of these accidents, and they're all the result of regulatory capture. And so that agency is captured by the airline, by the by the railroads, and I know exactly
It's
how to
not
unravel that.
orange.
The USDA, Department of Agriculture, which I've spent a lot of years suing, the USDA was created to protect small farmers in this country and to guarantee us a healthy food supply. And it is now doing just the opposite. Our food is poison. It doesn't have nutrients in it. And USDA every day is thinking of new ways to punish the family farmer and to support big agriculture. And I've sued Bo Pilgrim, the chicken farmer John Tyson, Frank Perdue, probably more than anybody else, any other attorney in the country, and Smithfield Foods. Smithfield came into North Carolina, built the biggest slaughterhouse, 30,000 hogs, and invented a new way of farming. They got a corrupt legislature named senator named Wendell Murphy to create 28 bills that made it illegal effectively to sue a factory farm, no matter how much they poison your water, poison your air, destroy your lives. And then they started building these all over the state. They dropped the price of hogs from 65 cents a pound to 2 cents a pound, and it cost a farmer 32 cents to raise a hog to kill weight, and they're only getting 2 cents. So every farmer in the state went bankrupt unless they signed a contract with Smithfield, and they took an industry that had 28,000 farmers in it, in 1979. And within 5 years, there were only 1,800 left, all of them either owned or operated by a single company, Smithfield Foods. And then Smithfield sold itself. Well, then Smithfield because it was selling 2-cent hogs in North Carolina, then was able to, through the markets, destroy the markets in every other state and propagate this system that is completely based upon polluting the environment and destroying the ecosystems and externalizing all of its costs. Iowa and all the other hog producers, and within a few years, Smithfield controlled 80% of hog production in our country, and then it sold itself to China. So China now controls 80% of hog production in the United States. It controls our farm landscapes. Our country, Thomas Jefferson said, America could only survive if it were to continue to be based upon independent family farmer, yeoman farmers who, controlling tens of thousands of independent freeholds, each with a stake in our economic system. And that's the heart and soul of democracy. Well, we don't have that anymore. We have a feudal system like they had in Europe, where you have a colonial system, where you have a foreign government that now controls our land base and our food supply. And all of that, the skids were all greased by USDA, which is now essentially controlled by China. Oh, that kind of corruption, I understand better than anybody else. Now, I'll just tell you an example about President Trump to show you how difficult this is. President Trump said that he was going to drain the swamp. He asked me in January of 2016 to come meet him in New York. He had just been elected. The election was over. He was the new president-elect, and he asked me to meet him at Trump Tower. And he brought me into a meeting with Hope Hill, Steve Bannon, both of his sons were there. Mike Pence was there, Kellyanne Conway, and he asked me to run a vaccine safety commission to chair it because he believed that he knew 3 women, mothers who were friends of his, who had their kids at 2-year-old exceeding all their milestones. They'd all received a battery of shots and then become autistic. And he believed that vaccines were causing autism. He wanted me to look at the science and make sure they were safety tested. I said, yeah. As soon as that was released, that news was, Bill Gates flew in to meet him. And Bill Gates bragged that he talked Trump out of the Vaccine Safety Commission. You can go on video and listen to him talking about me and say, I got rid of Bobby Kennedy's vaccine safety. At the same time Gates was there, Pfizer gave Trump $1 million for his inauguration. Trump then appoints Pfizer's 2 lobbyists, two hand-picked candidates Alex Azar to run HHS, and Scott Gottlieb, who is Pfizer's partner, business partner, to run FDA. Gottlieb then brings Operation Warp Speed through FDA, green lights, breaks every law to green light those vaccines, makes $88 billion for his business partner, then leaves HHS to go on the board of Pfizer. So that's not draining the swamp. That is the swamp. Do I think that Trump wanted to drain the swamp? Yes. But I think what happens is, like all these presidents, they get in there and they say they're going to reform and drain the swamp, but they look at these agencies. There's 30,000 people for that agency. The agency has a million ways of committing civil disobedience and screwing with you, embarrassing you politically. And so what they decide is it's just too much to handle. And what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to appoint somebody from the industry who will just not rock the boat and make sure that nothing happens at that agency to embarrass me. And that's what they do. Ralph Reed told me at one point, he said, the people they appoint are people who get the joke. They're the people who get the joke. And, what I said in my announcement speech is, I get the joke, but I don't think it's funny. And, my intention is to go in there, and I know what to do to break up these agencies. Not only those, but as you guys know, the Fed is captured by the big banks and by Wall Street. The SEC is a captured agency. The CIA is captured by the military-industrial complex, and I've been thinking for 40 years about exactly how you dismantle that organization in a way that keeps most of the 24,000 people who work for CIA are patriots. They're good public citizens. They're great public servants. But people, Mike Pompeo told me the other day, who was formerly the director of the CIA, I saw him in Las Vegas and had dinner with him, and he said, when I was at that agency, I did not do what I should have done, which is to actually reform that agency. And he said, I really regret that. And then he turned to me and he said, the entire upper echelon of CIA, of the plans division of the clandestine services, he said the entire upper echelon is made up of people who do not believe in the institutions of the United States democracy. So that was it was shocking, but not surprising. And, we need to change that. My father had a plan for doing it. I'm not going to go into it now unless somebody asks me to. But anyway, I'm excited about actually going in there and getting my hands dirty in these agencies, transforming them.
Thank you for that detailed answer. There's a lot of very important stuff you uncovered there that certainly needs attention. You just mentioned some of these regulatory bodies that have been captured. You mentioned the SEC. You also mentioned the Fed. So speaking about the Fed, the Federal Reserve is supposed to be independent, but we can see how Trump really leaned on them. Biden seems to have leaned on them to ease monetary policy for social programs, things like that. Since they have seemed to be sort of captured. To the kind of point that you just made, how do you see working with them moving forward? I know you talked about trying to partially back the U.S. dollar with gold or a basket of hard currencies or whatever. So how do you see working with the Fed and central banks under your administration?
Yeah, and by the way, I don't think that is going to solve the problem. That's a mechanism for sort of testing the water and testing the appetite and maybe putting some discipline, because it's not something I do across the board to every T-bill, but I would make an offering of T-bills that are backed by a basket of commodities like platinum, silver, gold, and Bitcoin. And I also really want to, encourage the proliferation of Bitcoin. I think everything the government does to do that injects discipline into the system, because if Americans have an alternative, a currency that is actually commodity based, that is a base currency, it makes it much more difficult for them to just print money whenever they want, because people have an alternative where they can go to. And the value currencies always win in those competitions. People will go to those currencies and they'll be drawn to them. But the, the gaining mastery of the Fed right now, we've lost sovereignty over our monetary system. It is being run by obscure forces that are linked to the big banks and to Wall Street, and they are operating it for nefarious purposes, or other words, non-democratic purposes. We've lost all transparency, and what they're trying to do now is to do the same thing, get that same kind of extend that control first to the states and then to individuals. And we need the state legislatures on our side to reform this issue. And this is happening in some states like Tennessee right now. That working with Catherine Austin Fitts and others to reassert control. And we need to work with the attorney generals in those states and with the legislatures to make the system, to regain transparency in the system, and to regain our sovereignty of it. And I am bringing in a group of advisors who this is all they think about, and that's what we need to do to restore Main Street. Because the purpose of the Fed now is to commoditize Main Street, suck all the wealth and equity away from the American public and concentrate it. And we need to turn that around. And so that's that's going to be one of the primary missions of my presidency.
So then, just to clarify, even though they are quasi independent, but you want to kind of put them back in a box and sort of restrict their influence over the markets. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, great. Appreciate that. Probably my last question here. You mentioned earlier that you've been, an environmentalist, and of course your track record speaks for that. Marty asked you a question about Bitcoin mining, and you sort of answered that you don't think they should regulate, energy for certain use cases. I'm just curious of your overall energy policy. The United States is in a situation where our main exports at this point are energy. And we've seen specifically with the Biden administration, the energy industry is sort of coming under attack a little bit. So I'm curious, being an environmentalist and with that track record and so forth, what your overall energy policy would be, not just in using it for Bitcoin mining. Of course, as you mentioned, so you already know that Bitcoin mining chases the cheapest energy. So we need a strong energy industry so we have that cheap access. But what is your overall energy policy look like?
My energy policy is and always has been market based, and you can go back and see the speeches that I made 35 years ago, where I say that the best thing that can happen to the environment is if we had true free market capitalism, because a true free market promotes efficiency, and efficiency means the elimination of waste. And pollution is waste. And a true free market would require us to properly value our natural resources. And it's the undervaluation of those resources that causes us to use them wastefully. And in a true free market, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community. But what polluters do is they make themselves rich by making other people poor, the rest of us poor. They raise standards of living for themselves by lowering quality of life for everybody else. And they do that by escaping the discipline of the free market. You show me a polluter and I'll show you a subsidy. I'll show you a fat cat using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay his production costs. That's what all pollution is. I fought the General Electric Company for many years on the Hudson River. I represented commercial fishermen on the Hudson. We have the oldest commercial fishery in North America. I represented hundreds of fishermen who are using fishing methods that were taught by the Algonquin Indians and the original Dutch settlers of New Amsterdam and then passed down through their generations. And they came together to fight pollution on the river because their livelihoods were being destroyed. This is a fishery that was self-regulating, ingenious ways that they regulated themselves. They all, they would count the fish, the recruiters that came into the river every year, and then they would figure out how many were needed, and they would pull their nets. Every fishing family in the river would pull their nets on certain days of the week to allow the recruiters, the pregnant females, to go up the river and spawn so that they would have them for next year. They've done this the same way for hundreds of years, and it was it's the richest waterway in the North Atlantic. And in the 1980s, they began closing down. And today, I represented thousands of fishermen. Now there's only one or two left because the General Electric Company dumped its PCBs in the river. It was illegal, and they did it up in Troy, New York. But they had a lot of political clout. And they were able to tell the governor, if you don't let us dump the PCBs in illegally, we're going to move 60,000 jobs out of New York. Well, the governor let them, and they said, we'll go over to New Jersey and we'll dump it from over there, and they'll get the taxes and they'll get the jobs. So a series of governors accepted those threats and let them dump their PCBs in. And then in the 80s, GE closed those plants. They closed down 60,000 jobs. So there's no General Electric worker in New York State today. But now we still have the pollution. And it's a $4.3 billion cleanup bill that nobody has. And every fisherman on the river is now out of work. And everybody in the Hudson Valley has General Electric's PCBs in our flesh and our organs. And they've closed down this fishery that enriched the palate and the history and the culture of the Hudson Valley for 3.5 centuries. And those fishermen understood that there was nothing wrong with their business model. What was wrong is that somebody had corrupted the political system to allow them to violate the law by privatizing the Hudson River. The Constitution of the state of New York says the river, the Hudson, belongs to the people of the state. The fish belong to the people. Everybody has a right to use them. Nobody can use them in a way that will diminish or injure their use and enjoyment by others. But General Electric got a permit to basically own all the fish on the Hudson because nobody else can use them anymore because they're too toxic. There's a lot of fish in the river. But they're dangerous to eat because they're loaded with General Electric's PCBs. And that's what all pollution is. And all the environmental laws that we passed after Earth Day 1970 are all designed to restore free market capitalism by forcing actors in the marketplace to pay the true cost of bringing their product to market. In a true free market, if you want to bring a product to market, you have to pay for all the costs of getting it there, including the cost of cleaning up your mess, which is a lesson we were all supposed to have learned in kindergarten. What polluters do is they figure out ways to get the public to shoulder some of those costs, and they can lower the price of their product and outcompete their honest competitors. And so what I've said for years is, I'm not an environmentalist, I'm a free marketeer. I go out into the marketplace and I catch the cheaters, the polluters, and I say to them, I'm going to force you to internalize your costs the same way that you internalize your profits. Because as long as somebody's externalizing their costs, they're distorting the marketplace, and none of us gets the advantage of the efficiency, the prosperity, the democracy that true free market capitalism promises our country. And, I'll say this, that, if you look directly at energy policy alone, which was your question, what I would say simplistically is my policy is to end the subsidies to the big industries, and carbon gets the biggest subsidies. Carbon gets 5.2 trillion globally, about 1.3 trillion annually, and just from the oil, in the oil in our country alone. And coal is the most heavily subsidized. So it is and nuclear, of course. Nobody's going to build a nuclear power plant unless it's fully subsidized, and then all the costs of disposing of the waste for the next 30,000 years, which is 5 times the length of recorded human history, are all externalized. The taxpayer pays those. nuclear also has the same thing the vaccine companies has, is it has immunity from liability. So that if they have an accident at the plant, they don't have to pay the cost. You do. Oh, what I say is, let's make everybody internalize their costs, and and then see what happens. And what's going to happen is we're going to move to renewable power, because right now it costs $1 billion a gigawatt to build a solar plant in America, which I built,
Lunch.
and it costs about
Hungry.
1.1 billion
Make some, but once
a
this
gigawatt to build wind.
talk
It
is
costs
over, because I want to
3.6
stream
billion
it
to
for
build a coal
guys.
plant, and then you got to pay for the fuel. So when you build a wind or solar plant, it's free energy forever. The big impediment is we don't have a grid system that can carry renewable power to all the markets,
Be
and
right
that's
back.
what we need. We need a real market-based plan that will turn every American into an energy entrepreneur, every home into a power plant, and power our country on American ingenuity, what Franklin Roosevelt called America's industrial genius, rather than Saudi Arabian oil or Appalachian coal. Now you build a coal plant for 3.5 times what it costs to build a wind plant or a solar plant, and now you've got to go to the Appalachian Mountains, cut down the Appalachians. So we've cut down the 500 biggest mountains in the Appalachians. We explode enough ammonium nitrate explosives in Appalachia every day, the same amount every week as a Hiroshima nuclear bomb. We've blown the tops off of, we flattened an area of the Appalachians larger than the state of Delaware. You fly over the Appalachians today and you will throw up. It is horrible. And the 500 biggest mountains have been leveled to the ground. They filled 2,200 miles of rivers with rubble. That's the cost of coal, and they burn the coal, and every freshwater fish in America has mercury, at dangerous levels of mercury in its flesh. The Appalachian Mountains have been stripped of forest cover on the high peaks from Georgia to northern Quebec. The Adirondacks, 1/5 of the lakes is now sterilized from acid rain, and we're acidifying the ocean. Those are the costs of coal. If coal says we're only 11 cents a kilowatt hour, but if they had to internalize their costs, it would be the most expensive way to boil a cup of coffee that has ever been devised. You'd be paying $20 a gigawatt if they had to, and the same with gas. If the gasoline companies had to pay for the oil wars, much less, all the other externalities, cleaning up the Gulf, cleaning up Valdez, the 200 billion we spend annually protecting the Saudi Arabian oil pipeline infrastructure. If they had to internalize that and that were reflected in the price of gasoline at the pump, you'd be paying, $15 a gallon for gasoline, and people would figure out other ways to get transportation. And that's the way things ought to work. Everybody ought to have to internalize their costs. We need to get rid of the subsidies and have true free market capitalism.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kennedy. And now, you had an incredible video today, actually, on your Twitter profile that said, if we gave you a sword and some ground to stand on, that you would win this country back. And of course, you mentioned that sword is money. I want everybody to know that you can visit www.kennedy24.com/donate, and you can donate even with Bitcoin via Lightning. Incredible way for this community to do that. And I just want to ask you quickly as we wrap here, are there any other ways that people can get out there, spread the word, and help to support your campaign?
Well, I mean, if you amplify if you have any kind of following on social media, amplify it, tell your friends, encourage people, even if they're only going to give, $5, please encourage people to join the army. And then, you're part of our army. You give even a $5 or $10. Do that. If you can give more, please do. I mean, many of you may notice that I'm getting slandered and silenced and censored. And when people hear me talk and they realize that I'm not a crazy person, not an anti-Semite, not any of the things that they say, not an anti-vaxxer, and my numbers are so much better than Biden's, that, and you know, that my numbers show me beating Trump, DeSantis, etc. People, you know, when they hear me, give me a say, rethink me, and most of them end up converting. Oh, but the challenge is getting in front of people, and we need money to do that. And particularly in these first 5 states in South Carolina, New Hampshire, Nevada, Michigan, and Iowa, we need to spend a lot on advertising. And so, if you anything you can send us will help. And I'm very, very grateful for the incredible support that I've gotten from your community, from people. You know, Bitcoiners are a unique breed. They're of all the financial people I've met in my life, people in finance. You know, I'm in New York right now. I'm mainly interested in making a big pile for themselves, and whoever dies with the most stuff wins. Bitcoiners are a different breed. They like money, they like profits, but mainly because it shows that you can make money you can do well by doing good, by winning freedom. And they're ideologically based. They're people who love freedom, and they're enthusiastic about Bitcoin because it's a symbol for freedom and it's the currency of freedom. So I love you guys. I feel that a spiritual bond with you, and I really want to promote you. By the way, before I went down to the Bitcoin Miami conference, people asked me, "Do you own any Bitcoin?" And I said, "No, I don't." And I got a lot of criticism for that. And people from the newspapers, from the Washington Post, for example, said, "Oh, you're promoting this commodity and it's volatile, and a lot of people got hurt, and you don't even own any." So it happened that right after that Bitcoin conference, I got my pay from the Monsanto case. I got a big check, and I said, "Okay, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is." So I bought 2 Bitcoins for each of my 7 children. That's what I used my Monsanto payment for. So now I'm a Bitcoin owner. And I'm sure that they're going to now figure out a different way to come at me, but nobody can say I didn't put my money where my mouth is. So anyway, I'm really glad to be with you guys, and I'm very, very happy for the support that I've gotten from the Bitcoin community.
And nobody can take your Bitcoin. Once again, everybody, I pinned the tweet that I mentioned before with that video just above, so you can all check it out there. www.kennedy24.com/donate. Mr. Kennedy, it's been a true honor. Thank you so much for your time. Robert, Natalie, Mark, Marty, you guys are absolute legends. A pleasure to share the stage with you, and I think we all have to thank Justin Rezvani from Zion for helping to put all of this together. Just an incredible, incredible person who I know we all share a bond with, and love having been a part of this. So thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Hopefully we'll do this again soon.
I'm gonna make me some lunch, 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 lunch. I'm gonna make me some lunch, lunch, la 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 lunch. La 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 lunch. La, la. RFK Jr. confirms he bought 2 Bitcoin for each of his 7 children after Bitcoin Miami using his commission from the Monsanto case. Based. 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 Can't tell me nothing. Can't tell me nothing, brother. You know why you can't tell me nothing? A lot of you ain't got your own jobs. And if you got your own job and you got one job in your life, you probably got it from somebody you know. No, I've had 2 jobs. I don't mean to sound like I'm bragging, but I've been through like 15, 20, 30 employers. And from people I'm related to, all the way down to friends, all the way down to nobodies. And yeah, man, get out there and you learn how the real world works. Can't really and call your place where you're at just home. Up with your own decision. Dee-dee-dee. Dee-dee. All right. Well, I am about to about to about to put it on. Should I show you how I do it? Show you how I do it. Oh. Don't want. I'm about to cook lunch. I'll start the stream again if I have to. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. Not too much going on today. Hopefully you're staying lovely because that ain't illegal yet. You know what it is. Until next